Of it, running the floor, Embiid stuffs it.
Harden for three. James Harden with his second triple.
What is going on, guys? Welcome back to the Pick Swap Media channel. We're here with a little something different today. Going to break down our top 8 draft prospects. And here with me, I got a special guest, Ryan Coyle. So, Ryan, introduce yourself a little about your background with scouting prospects, with what you do, and then we'll jump right into it.
What's up? Thanks for having me, Sean. I'm looking forward to being part of the network, helping everyone grow. I have my own podcast, Beef Up Front. We're on the channel now as well. I'm a high school and college basketball player in my past. Just graduated a few weeks ago. I do some scouting on the side for high school players looking to go to college, and as well as work at a basketball website called CityofBasketballLove, where they cover a lot of high school and college basketball recruiting stuff. So watch a lot of hoops. My time as a college player, I also served as the assistant coach this past year, so did a lot of scouting and recruiting on that side as well. And I probably watch more college basketball than anyone. It's my favorite thing to watch in my free time, so looking forward to breaking down my top prospects and hearing yours as well.
Yeah, man. It's an exciting thing to bring to the channel, one of my passions as well, so I'm ready to jump right into it. We'll be doing some NBA draft scouting and looking at our top prospects. So, Ryan, who do you have as your number one prospect on the board this year?
So this is a really good class. I think you can make an argument for 3, maybe even 4 guys to be your number one. But my number one is Jabari Smith, the forward out of Auburn. 6'10", 220 pounds, really can shoot the ball at that size. 42% from 3 this year. Excuse me. A little bit under 80% from the line, so that's a good indicator that that's something that's going to translate. That's a big thing I look at, especially with a guy where if he has decent form and solid shooting mechanics, if he can shoot well from the line, I know that over time, if he puts the time in and the reps in, his three-point percentage is going to get better. So Smith might even have a little bit more room to grow in that regard. Can score, can rebound, and he can defend all 5 positions on the perimeter. So really solid frame at 6'10", 220 pounds. We'll be talking about Chet Holmgren, I assume, in the later parts of this episode. But if you look at him, he's only 195. Jabari Smith comes in at 220. So he's got an NBA-ready body, and he still has room to put on some more muscle as well. One thing with him, though, and that hurt Auburn down the stretch of the year and at the end of games where they started out, I believe, 20-1, they kind of faltered down the stretch, and that's because they didn't really have a go-to guy down the stretch. That's where Smith, I think, has to step up if he wants to become, a top 5, top 10 player in the league, be able to have the ball in his hands down the stretch and go get a bucket. That's something I think he needs to improve on. And sometimes like his speed and his quickness worries me a little bit, being able to get by some of those better, faster defenders. But all the skill sets there, it sounds like all the intangibles are there from what you've heard from Bruce Pearl and from listening to different reporters and podcasts and whatnot. He's a really, really intriguing prospect, and that's why I put him as my number one.
Yeah, that seems to be kind of the consensus is Jabari at 1. It's tough to put an exact kind of player comp or a label on him. He's very unique in terms of he's a guy who gets to his spot, a terrific kind of 2-dribble and shot guy. I am a little concerned with takes a lot of like tough mid-range jumpers. He shot 42.9% from the field and 42% from 3, which kind of an indicator of that there. A lot of times you like to see that field goal percentage a little bit higher than the 3. He was 1.96 points per possession on catch and shoot, which is very impressive. He's a guy you can run off screens, get going like that. Like you said about the go-to scorer, I think that is my biggest concern. When you look at the way that he kind of gets his buckets, it's a lot of times like a 2-dribble and get a shot up. He's not a guy with like a ton of shake or an ISO go and get to his bag and get to his spot. So he's kind of quick with that, but a lot to like there. To jump to my number one, I'm going Chet Holmgren as my number one. I think a lot of people are just overthinking this pick in a lot of ways. He's so weird looking. He's bizarre. Obviously, such a unique frame. A player that we also don't really have a true player comp for. But I really do think he's just the most overall talented player in this draft. The way he can create, the potential he has as a passer, and he's a guy who can just flat out play basketball. I get like the frame's weird. I get there's injury concerns, but I think the bust potential that he's labeled is way overstated. I think the worst case scenario for Chet is still a high impact role player, which now granted that's not what you're targeting with your number 1 overall pick, but I think the likelihood is he hits much higher than that. When you look at players who have kind of a weak frame or kind of what he's perceived at, he plays much tougher than you'd expect. Like he's a guy, he does a great job when guys attack his chest on the drive using his 7'6" wingspan to just swallow them up and find a way to block shots. He had some trouble, some foul trouble. There were moments where you certainly hope would be that better, but overall, I just love Chet's complete game. I think he can do a little bit of everything, and I think he's going to continue to develop at the next level.
Yeah, he's super unique. I don't really remember seeing a guy like him. Even watching him his senior year of high school, he was on ESPN a few times.
Yeah.
Just the things that he can do on the court are really unique. But I'll talk about him when we get to where I have him on my rankings a little bit more. But one thing that did stick out to me when you're saying about foul trouble, I remember in the tournament, Memphis really gave Gonzaga a run, and that Jalen Duren, he is a NBA lottery pick probably this year. He's got that NBA size and frame already, and that's what kind of gave Chet some troubles. He's got the length where if he does get pushed under the hoop, his length might be able to make up for it. But still, I'm worried about that. At least for his first 2 or 3 years in the league, he definitely could put on the weight. But I think if he's a guy who could put there's just some people who just can't put on weight. It's weird to say, but they're just not meant to be big and strong. And I'm just worried that in his frame that he's not able to do that. But you look at Giannis, and he's now one of the more muscular players in the league. But then you look at KD, he's never really been able to put on weight, but still he's able to do stuff. I don't know. It's really, really hard to evaluate these type of things, but that's what these people get paid millions of dollars for. So.
Yeah, it's interesting. I personally lean toward he's a guy that's going to struggle to put on weight. He's obviously a long-term project in terms of getting his body ready, but I just still buy the instincts and everything he has. The defensive potential he still holds. He has terrific instincts for getting help side blocks coming across, and his wingspan just helps him do everything. There were a couple times where guys would go up on one the basket and fake and go under, and he would still be able to reach and cross and block. And that's the kind of stuff that is going to translate. So I buy into his toughness. He's got some shot creation. He's got a little bit of a bag. And I think if he just wasn't as weird looking, he would be the consensus number 1. But to move on, who do you have as your number 2 prospect?
So number 2, I'm going Paolo, freshman forward out of Duke, 6'10", 250. What I was talking about with Smith with an NBA-ready frame, Paolo's got even more of an NBA-ready frame. Averaged a little over 17 a game, 7 rebounds, 3.2 assists as well, which was kind of intriguing for me because you look at Jabari Smith, only 2. I know it's only 1.2 more, but that shows that he has some more playmaking ability and are pretty efficient from the field. His 3-point percentage, though, was concerning to me, 31.7%. The shot doesn't look terrible, but it doesn't look great at the same time. And I think if you're going to reach your ceiling in the NBA, we see it time and time out, you have to be able to shoot the outside shot now. But he's a pure physical guy, 6'10", 250, broad shoulders, just is going to be able to match up with guys physically in the NBA from day one. But my thing is, you're not at Duke anymore playing against Boston College or Clemson where you're having 6'6", 200-pound power forwards guarding you. You're having guys in the NBA where we're seeing, Jason Tatum, LeBron, just guys like that who are men, just grown men out there, and they're going to be able to match you blow for blow. So that's something I'm a little bit worried about, that he's not going to be able to physically overpower everybody in the NBA anymore, but still a very intriguing prospect, just kind of nitpicking at some stuff, but definitely need to see his 3-point percentage go up if he wants to be an all-star type of player.
Yeah, I also have Paolo as my number 2. Kind of what I said about Chet when we talk about overcomplicating things. At the end of the day, the game is about getting buckets, and that's what he does best. When we talk about an NBA-ready body, I have a much bigger concern for both Jabari and for Chet than I do for Paolo. I mean, we're talking about he's 30 pounds heavier than Jabari and 55 pounds heavier than Chet. And just his build, his athleticism, and I buy the handle and the shake that he has way more than the other two. I think he's able to get to his spots, use his physicality, get to the basket, and that's something that's going to translate at the NBA level. We're talking about, he has the NBA size in a way that, he's still going to be somewhat of a freak at the next level. Like he's in a very small minority of kind of who can fit his body type at 6'10", 250 pounds, and the way he moves, can handle the ball. Good shot creation. The assist is super intriguing to me. You can do by far the most with Paolo out of any of the prospects in the draft in terms of he can run on offense a little bit. He can do defensively. He's not great. That's probably one of the bigger red flags in his game. But I kind of brushed that off a little bit in college too. I think there's times where guys just simply like check out in a way that it just kind of happens. Not that you ever want to see that, but I give it more of a pass. He's a guy that has the tools to put them together, and I think will improve over time. So I agree. Paolo is my number 2 prospect.
Yeah, and when you watch Duke, when I was kind of talking about with Smith, when Duke went to Paolo down the stretch, that's where they were at their best. I'm not sure if it was a Coach K and the offense thing or like Paolo not wanting the ball, but when Duke struggled, that's when you saw Paolo kind of fade, and he wasn't really making himself notice, I feel like, out on the court. But then when he was like asserting himself down the stretch and he was getting the ball on the block, he was just going to the hoop every time and scoring. So that's somewhere I kind of want to see. Maybe his motor wasn't running at 100% all the time, and if it is, then I think he could be a scary guy at the next level.
Yeah, and real quick, kind of what I said about the defense, when I talk about how like the potential's there, looking at just kind of the possessions where he was attacked, in isolation, opponents were 7 for 32, 21.9%, and guarding pick and roll ball handlers, opponents shot 3 for 23, only 13%. So I do think that the potential is there when he takes it seriously and when he's asked to do that on a more regular basis at the NBA level. So to move on to the number 3 pick, who's your number 3 prospect in this draft?
So that's where I slot in Chet. Just like we were talking about, just a truly unique guy in terms of height, length, weight, and skills. You really touched on kind of everything that I like about him. I really like his defensive potential. Like, I think this is a guy where if he's even just able to put on like 10, 15 pounds, I think he's like a first team all defense type guy at worst. I'm going to be interested to see how he's able to hold up down low in the NBA on the offensive end, if he's able to get guys moving and get to his spot on offense. I'm just worried personally that he's not going to be able to hold up for that 82-game season. We don't know. It's something that you have to kind of take that calculated risk. That's my biggest concern with him, but I feel like that is a pretty big concern because best ability is availability, and I'm just a little bit worried about that. But if you're going to be taking a swing for the fences, I'm with you. He would probably be the number 1 guy, but I think Jabari is the most NBA ready and has like the highest ceiling out of these guys, like in terms of safeness. So that's why I would put him at 1. But Holmgren, I think, is probably the most talented guy in this draft, but also the biggest risk.
Yeah. I mean, I don't – the positional thing is a little bit weird to me. I don't think he can ever be a center in the NBA. I think he's just going to be not strong enough for that. But I think there's certain matchups that he would absolutely dominate just based on the skills that he has. He can guard a little bit on the perimeter. He can stick with guys out there. The instincts he has defensively and how active he is just jumps off the page to me. That's been what's most surprised me about him in college, because he's been a guy that's obviously had kind of the underlying attention throughout his whole high school career and even before. But the way he just plays it's kind of a winning brand of basketball that appeals to me. And like, again, he's super weird. I think Evan Mobley is kind of the best player comp I can give him. And it kind of how the Cavs use Mobley, and like they're careful with what matchups that they put him on. They use him as like a roamer and a free safety a lot of the times. The exact same can be said about Chet, and I think he can be super impactful that way. He's obviously like a player that you have to be patient about, but I think all of the top 3 teams, the Magic, the Thunder, and Rockets, are in spots where they can be patient with his development and that it'll pay off in the long run.
Yeah, and then you look at a guy who, I don't know why when you said Mobley, but my mind kind of went towards Pokusevsky, the guy on the Thunder, where he's like a super high upside prospect. But even if you look at him, like he's like been like pretty decent in the NBA, and Chet is probably 5 times more talented than him. So worst case scenario, you get like that. That's not the end of the world, but still, I think he's got more to tap into. And like we said, just you got to hope if you're a team that he's able to put on weight and he can just live in the weight room in the off seasons.
Yeah, absolutely. To jump to my number 3 prospect, mine's Jabari Smith. So we have this flipped on our boards. There's a lot to like about Jabari. The thing I will say is I feel like there's a chance he's more kind of toward the Rashard Lewis, Tobias Harris type of role in terms of like a complimentary scorer, but not a guy that's like your go-to heavily impact the game. Still a player you need on your team, but not necessarily the star you're hoping for with like a potential top 30 pick, number 1 overall pick in that range. I'm also very clouded for that final college game he played against Miami. He really struggled. That was probably his worst game of the season. Defensively were my biggest concerns too. Guys like Isaiah Wong were kind of casually finishing around him at the basket in ways that just should not happen. Like I went back and watched kind of that game the other day, and there were 3 like clear opportunities where he had time lined up for a block shot, and it just like kind of went through his hand and had him score. And offensively, he kind of failed to assert himself too. Obviously, you just can't take one game as a pure sample size, but it does kind of like that sticks in my mind more than it probably should. The contested twos is also kind of a big deal for me. That like for me is the worst shot in basketball when he loves kind of the dribble in one dribble beyond the 3-point line and shoot it too. And he hit some tough shots, but like I also am concerned about him creating separation at the next level because he kind of relies on just like shooting over guys with his 6'10" frame. He's obviously a great shot maker. The catch and shoot stuff super appealing. You can do a lot for him off ball, but as far as just becoming the guy, I don't feel that confident about that with Jabari.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what you said, but having watched Auburn a lot this year, their guards were heavily reliant on shooting the 3. So that could have been like kind of chalked up to his role. I agree that the mid-range shot, especially the contested ones, are some of the worst shots you could take. But I'm just intrigued to see like the situation that he gets in, and if they let him just do what he does best, and that's kind of hang out on the perimeter and shoot threes right now, and eventually grow from there. But that's one of the biggest things in terms of the NBA draft, going to the right situation. Like, I feel bad for whoever goes to the Kings because whoever they pick usually it turns out to be a dumpster fire because the whole situation there is just awful. So it's big in terms of fit and where you go if you're going to have success in the NBA from day one.
Yeah, definitely. I'm also impressed with the steal and block number that Jabari Smith posted, considering playing next to Walker Kessler, who's a guy also projected to typically be a late first-round pick in this. He dominated a lot of the rebounding battle and stuff around there, so to still have an impact is impressive.
Yeah.
To move on, who do you have as your number 4 prospect?
That's where I slot in Jaden Ivey, sophomore guard out of Purdue. You hear the Ja Morant comparison with him. I think it's mostly just because of that. Their athleticism as well as their hair is very similar, but they're I think not very different players, but they're not the same type of guy. I hear a lot of people slot in Ivy as like a point guard where he played a lot of that at Purdue, but I project him more as a combo guard in my mock draft for the podcast network. I had him go into the Rockets and pairing him with Jalen Green, which not ideal if you're looking for the best defensive backcourt right now and like a pure playmaker, but that would just be a super explosive and really fun to watch team on offense. He's an elite athlete, very good explosion, shoots the ball pretty well, a little under 36%, pretty efficient from the field. Free throws about 75%, so he could improve his 3-point shot. That kind of tells me if he's up to like a 38-39%, that would make it really tough with his ability to get by guys in one step. And he rebounds pretty well as well. A little bit under 5 rebounds for a 6'4" guard. The big knock on him right now is his defense. But if you look at that explosion, that athleticism, just his natural raw ability, it's all about the buy-in for him. I forget who you were talking about it with earlier. It might have been Paolo, but it's kind of just college. You're really just worried about your offense and figuring out what you can do in that game. Jaden Ivey could go to a spot where he's the second or third most talented guy on the team, and they're like, you have to adopt yourself into being our best defensive player on the perimeter. And if he really wants to do that, I think he could just based off of his natural talent. So he's a guy I'm excited about. I think he's going to be really productive from day one just because athletically he is there for the NBA. But he does have some stuff he needs to clean up, especially his turnovers if he wants to be a point guard. I believe he had over like 2.5 per game. So that's something I think he needs to get down.
Yeah, definitely. He's a true freak athlete and a true coast-to-coast guy, a guy that can grab the board, take it all the way, 1.11 points per possession in transition. He gets compared to Ja Morant a lot, like you said. I see a little bit more of kind of like the Anthony Edwards type of role, maybe in a little Russ Westbrook. That kind of just like his head down, but he is like a freak athlete nonetheless, and a guy that will absolutely translate the NBA level. 6'9" wingspan, which is appealing from the defensive end. I think he's going to be able to stick with some wings when he locks in, which is a switchable guy appealing. I don't completely buy into the shot. He took a massive step forward this year. As a sophomore, his freshman year, he shot in the low 20s from 3 to 35.8% from 3 this year. That kind of drastically changed his NBA outlook, and as it should. I mean, he had a very good year at Purdue. He's a guy that like checks a lot of boxes for what you look like. I would like to see him put it all together a little more. There's at times where he can be a little too hectic on the court, but he gets to his spots. He's not afraid to dunk on a guy's head, and there is a ton to like. He's good for some highlight reels at the very minimum, and I think he is going to be a very good player in the long term. I have him a little bit lower in my list. To jump to my number 4, I'm going to throw Benedict Mathurin on there, and this is a guy that I really, really like from Arizona. It's kind of up in the air where he's going to land in the draft. He seems to be valued a little bit lower than a lot of these guys, but he, to me, has every bit of the star potential that we talk about in this, and he has that it factor. He can move off the ball, a terrific catch and shooter, kind of from the Devin Booker, kind of Bradley Beal kind of mold is where I see him looking best. I'm so impressed with the way he's able to like step up as a number 1 guy. 17.7 points, 5.6 rebounds, 2.5 assists. He can shoot the 3. He can handle. He can create a little bit, and he's just not afraid to get the ball with the game on the line, which I absolutely love.
Yeah, this is where I'm kind of interested because it seems like most people at least have like the same 3 prospects, maybe in different order. This is where I'm interested to see where our list compare. He's my number 5 guy, Mathurin, if we want to just hop into that. A player with really no red flags, according to like my view. He's just a guy where I think he might be able to come in and be like the most impactful rookie from day one. Him and a guy I'll talk about in a little bit, but I don't see him like having that like learning period or growth period, really. Maybe not be like an all-star, but a guy who's just able to come in and be an impactful rotation player right away. Not really elite at anything, but does a lot of things well. Able to score the ball and rebound the ball well for an off guard. My comparison for him was just like a Karis LeVert at that 6'6" size where he can shoot, he can rebound. Just I think his future is like a 14, 15 points per game type of guy, and he's able to stick around in the league and able to contribute in a lot of areas. So he's a guy I'm really excited about.
Yeah, me too. There's a little bit more to be desired with like his athleticism. He doesn't have necessarily a pop. Most of his scoring came off like plays in the catch and shoot, but that's all stuff that translates to the NBA level. He was only 3 for 14 on isolation attempts this year, which you'd like to see higher. He lacks a little bit of like the in-between game from the mid-range and short mid-range. He's more of kind of an attack the basket or shoot the 3 guy. Another guy who's not afraid to throw it down on your head and slam dunk pretty harshly, which I love. But I just buy into Benedict Mathurin. I think he's going to be a guy we look back at a couple years down the line, and he outperforms his draft slot. We talked about Jaden Ivey. He's my number 5 prospect on this. Kind of what I said. I don't completely buy into the shot, and I think he's a little bit of a weird tweener in terms of like ball dominant, but not a great playmaker in that kind of regard. I think there'll be some growing pains with him, but still I think projects very well in the long term. When we were texting back and forth, I said how my top 5 was pretty locked. And my next 3 were what I was a little more up in the air. So I'm also curious where we go from here. Who do you have as your number 6 prospect?
So my number 6 guy is a guy I think will be first-team rookie next year. He reminds me of like a guy who like a Herb Jones from last year or a Mikal Bridges from a few years ago. He's just going to be able to go in, impact the game from day one, or even like a Desmond Bane. That's Ochai Agbaji, the guard out of Kansas. 19 points per game this year, 5 rebounds. And he's a guy where you look at his numbers year over year, just continue to improve. 40% from 3 this year. My comparison for him is like a Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, a guy who on offense, he's not going to be creative much for you, a little under 2 assists per game, but he's going to be able to shoot the ball and defend, and he's just a grown man already, 22 years old. So when you look at getting like a veteran-type guy out of the draft, he's a guy who played in the Big 12 for 4 years, like I said, consistently improved, and you know what you're getting out of him. So he's a guy I think will be a first-team all-rookie type this year. He doesn't have the highest ceiling out of these guys. I think he kind of is what he is at this point. We could see maybe some of these numbers increase, like his three-point percentage, maybe get up to like a 42, 43%. But he's a guy I'm really excited about, and I think is going to be the safest prospect out of this draft.
Yeah, that's a good pick. I did not have a ticker for Agbaji, so that's my bad on that. But a guy I really like nonetheless. And like you said, he showed great progress at Kansas. A very cool story as well. A guy who waited for his chance and earned it and proved it. He's got a pretty impressive collegiate resume in terms of all the Player of the Year honors, the Big 12 honors, everything that came along with it. And I mean, he can flat out score the basketball. He's a guy that's going to translate at the next level, a guy that's never afraid to let it fly. I have some concerns for his like overall ceiling in terms of I think he's probably more likely to be a guy that's like an impact scorer rather than like a key part of the team. Like he might even be best suited as an off the bench, like microwave kind of guy, but that's still an absolutely role for him. A guy that can step in, decent size, and will be a fit on just about every NBA roster. So I think that's a solid pick. For my number 6, I'm going with Keegan Murray. A lot of the same reasons. I won't even say I particularly love Keegan Murray's game, but I think he's a guy that checks a lot of boxes at the next level. He's a little bit from kind of the Mikal Bridges kind of wingy mold. I think he's going to be projected somewhat like of a 3 or a 4 in the NBA, which is not a critique, but he played more 4 in college. He was the man at Iowa and was relied on for just about everything that they did. The 2.9 offensive rebounds is especially intriguing to me. He's a very high motor player, very good in transition. He scored he was 1.5 points per possession in transition, which was first across all D1 players with over 60 possessions. He's a guy that can go coast to coast, isn't afraid to get out and run, can catch lobs, and another guy that I think is going to, as he continues in the NBA, is going to become kind of elite in his role of like a complementary piece.
Yeah, one of the best players in college this year, and Iowa down the stretch until they ran into Richmond were one of the best teams in college basketball on the back of him. He really improved from his freshman year to his sophomore year, 23.5 points per game, just a very, very efficient player as well. Shooting 55.4% as like a forward who shoots a lot of outside shots. That's very impressive. My comp for him was Cam Johnson. You said Mikal Bridges, kind of like the same, but I think he has 2 inches on Bridges. I think Cam Johnson's around 6'8" as well. So if you're able to get a guy down here at like number 6 or 7, I think in the mock I had him going to the Pacers. This is just like a winning player. He's just going to be able to go in, make an impact, and just help you win basketball games. Not like once you get out of the top 3, I think that's where you kind of get out of the all-star, like potential, like Hall of Fame type of guys in most drafts. Then you get down to here, you're really just looking for the best players that you can fit into your starting lineup and kind of build around your team going forward. Then you gotta, if you're one of these teams in this area, you either gotta hope you're getting better with your young core, or like you tank one more season and you're able to get up into that top 2 or 3 to get one of those high-level guys. So Keegan Murray is a guy I'm definitely high on as well. He's my 7th guy. I think he's going to be a very, very productive NBA player. A little bit worried about like his speed and athleticism in terms of guarding some of these faster, quicker wings. Like I don't know how well he'd match up against like a Jason Tatum or a Jaylen Brown. Not many people do match up well against those guys, but I don't think he's going to be like an elite level defender, but a guy who's able to hold his own, make shots, rebound the ball. You're going to have a spot in the NBA for a long time if you do that.
Yeah, definitely. I think he's best kind of projected as a guy that can guard a little bit smaller players, a guy that maybe he can defend well on the perimeter. I have some concerns that like he's more of a 1 through 4 kind of range for his defense rather than 1 through 5. I think centers will eat him up a little bit, but still has potential to play some small ball minutes at the 4, a really modern day stretch forward or a wing player. So a good like young player to add to a nucleus. Winning habits, a guy that I really like. So cool. He's your number 7. To move on to mine, I have Jeremy Sochan as my number 7. A guy that I really like, and the phrase can defend 1 through 5 gets thrown around so much. He's a guy that it truly applies to, and he's so active on the perimeter. An interesting story too. He was the number 90 recruit versus Kendall Brown. His teammate was the number 10 recruit coming into college. Kendall Brown was the guy kind of expected to like outperform expectations, be that high end NBA prospect, and it really has kind of turned out the opposite. Sochan has kind of outplayed him. Kendall Brown elected to go back to college after kind of being a faller in all the projections. But his activity and just the way he plays is super appealing to me. There's a ton to be desired offensively still. Not a great shooter from the perimeter, not a lot of like offensive game overall, but defensively he can come and make an impact right away, and I buy into the defensive potential. I mean, the offensive potential as well. So like he's a guy I think can come in from day one, change your team in terms of how you can match up with, and like in the long term, you're hoping that offensive game comes along.
Yeah, he's one of the guys in this process that like I don't know that much about because I feel like at Baylor he was overshadowed by some of the other guys. So he's a guy that I'm definitely gonna have to brush up on a little bit more. Just that's the hardest thing with like the NBA draft. If you're looking like at NFL, like like all the first round picks, like you've seen them all. There's some of these NBA guys sometimes that kind of come out of like left field that you're not really knowing that much about just because there's so many teams that like they're so top heavy where they're like 3rd or 4th option. They might not be like the best scorer or something, but they can still translate to a very good NBA player. So that's where I think it's a lot harder to evaluate the NBA draft than the NFL sometimes.
Yeah, the a little bit more of the intrigue to me. I kind of talked about defensively. Opponents were just 6 of 22 on isolations. He's an impressive pick and roll and pick and pop defender. He's cool with blitzing. He can drop. He can do just about any coverage that you ask him to. And then his pass off the pick and roll is impressive to me. The Baylor ran a ton of plays where Sohan served as a screener, got the pocket pass, and was able to dish to the corner or dish to a cutter in a way that I think will 100% apply in the NBA. So that's something super intriguing. That you got your 1 through 7 out, right?
Yep.
So who is your number 8 prospect on your list?
So a name that neither of us have said so far, and I'm intrigued to see if you say his name, Shaedon Sharpe, but that's not going to be my 8th guy. I'm leaving him out. I think he's too big of a risk right now. My number 8 is actually going to be Malachi Branham, freshman guard at Ohio State. He's probably been my biggest riser, probably since I really started. I kind of spend the first 2 months of the season just watching games and kind of getting a feel for guys. But then over the last 2 months of the season is where I really start to lock in and narrow down and kind of start to build a prospect list when I'm evaluating these guys. And he's probably my biggest riser because he got so much better as the year went around. I think he's very underrated. I think, like I said, the top of this draft is very good, and he might get lost in the shuffle up there. But I could see him being one of the more impactful guys out of this draft. Probably the most efficient. What'd you say?
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, he's probably the most efficient guard, I think, in this draft. A little under 50% from the – I think he might have actually finished his season over 50% from the field, about 42% from three, and he shot 84% from the free throw line. So all good indicators of that translating. Really stood out to me in the Villanova game in the round of 32. He had 23 points. I could just see him making an instant impact. I feel like I've said that with these last few guys. Some of the other guys have more of that high ceiling, so it might take him a little bit more to tap into. But this is a guy I kind of compared to Spencer Dinwiddie on the offensive end, and he's a little bit better on defense, and I think he's got some more tools. 6'5", 180 pounds. Like to see him maybe get up to 190-ish just to be able to guard some of these stronger players. But a guy I'm really excited about, and he was only a freshman this past year. So if he's an Abaji guy who kind of they're in the same frame and they kind of play a bit of a similar style game. I think Branham's better at getting to the hoop. But if Branham's able to progress kind of like Abaji was, and he's just in the NBA now, so that's all he's doing, just basketball every day. I think he's a guy who could be a very, very good NBA player.
Yeah, definitely. He's only 18 years old. 13.7 points per game, 3.6 rebounds, 2-point assists, 49.8% from the field, and 41.6% from three, which are both very good splits. A guy that's super smooth, super patient in his approach. He can handle the ball well. He gets to a spot. He's got a really nice pull-up jumper. There's just a lot to like about him in terms of efficiency. I have a little bit of concern in terms of the lack of pop. There seems to be he's way more smooth than he is athletic or that. Just that kind of, he's just very smooth in the way he goes about the game. You threw out a Karis LeVert comp earlier. I think Karis LeVert's a good comp for him as well in the way that he just kind of does his thing, gets to his spots, but a guy that has a super high upside. I don't think that's a bad name at 8 a lot. I'm also leaving Shaedon Sharpe off this. A guy who has a ton of buzz, just like you said, for me, it's just too big of a risk. We just don't know what this guy brings to the table. Obviously, he was the number one recruit in the class, next year's class. He reclassified, didn't play any college basketball this year at Kentucky. I personally really like Ty Washington. He's way more highly ranked than Ty Washington. So it's going to be interesting how he turns out. But I think there's a real chance if there was film on him, he's kind of projected as more of kind of the mid-20s and in kind of that kind of range than he is as the top prospect just based on how his game looks. It's really hard to tell off the lack of tape. My number 8, I battled a little bit here to throw some shout-outs. Johnny Davis and Dyson Daniels were very close to cracking my list. But I ended up going with Jalen Duren as my number 8 prospect. I'm usually pretty anti-center at the top of the draft, but this is a guy who's kind of in for me. Just an elite athlete. 6'10", got a 7'6" wingspan. His athletically just pops off the film every night. He can block shots. He can rise up, slam dunks. He's a perfect model for a rim running big in today's modern NBA for me. And when we're talking about this range of picks, he's a guy who I think can do his job at a very high level. And there's limits to his ceiling. He doesn't have any range right now. Didn't attempt threes in college at all. Something maybe you can hope for down the line. But on defense is what excites me the most. 2.1 blocks per game. he altered way more blocks than actually went on the tape. When you look at guys, were just like intimidated to drive the basket with him there, and that's not going to change at the NBA level either. He's just an absolute animal in terms of blocking shots, rising up, meeting guys with his verticality, and it does an excellent job of keeping his hands straight up and not fouling, which is super important across the NBA. So I have Jalen Duren as my number 8 prospect.
And he's a guy who's actually supposed to be a high school senior this past year. So another guy who's really young, because he's like a Philadelphia kid. He went down to Montverde, I believe, just for or maybe it was the past 2 years. And then as we know, he went to Memphis. But I know a guy you're high on, having watched or seen some of your tweets from the finals last night, is Robert Williams. I feel like he's kind of like a Robert Williams in terms of what he can do for you. And if you're able to get him down here around like pick 9 or 10, I think that would make a team very happy, because Williams was a guy I really liked, and he was really highly recruited coming out. There's kind of like some head stuff with him. Is his motor going to be running all the time? Is he like fully committed to basketball? But then you get him to a good organization like the Boston Celtics, and you're able to get the most out of him. That's why I had Duren going to the San Antonio Spurs, where you get him in a good organization, good proven track record of player development. You're going to be able to get the most out of a guy. So I'm excited to see where Duren falls. But curious, who's like one guy that maybe some of the media and other people are higher on that you're not really even having close to like your top 8 or 10 players?
Shaedon Sharpe was the one that jumped into my mind for that, but that's more of kind of like a risk thing, not necessarily like what I think about his game. I'm definitely lower on Jabari than most people. I'm trying to think of like a perfect name for the fit. I might even say Jabari is the guy I'm lower on in like retrospect to everybody. I don't look at him as kind of the surefire like top prospect that I think a lot of people do. It's just like he's obviously incredibly skilled. He's not going to be a bad player to add to the team. There's some sort of NBA role for him, but like I just don't know if he's a surefire star in the way he's projected to be.
Yeah, guy I'm a little bit lower on than most, and I've seen him like all the way up at 6 in some mock drafts, is AJ Griffin out of Duke. Can really shoot the ball well, but I think that's like about it. Like, doesn't offer much as a rebounder, is like pretty solid on the defensive end, but I just don't think he's like even like elite enough as a shooter. Like he was a good shooter in college, but still, when you have all that talent around you, you're getting like space and stuff. You're supposed to be knocking down threes if you're shooting that much. I just think of how vital shooting is in today's NBA. He's going to go high, but he's a guy who I'm kind of worrisome about in terms of his long-term potential and just being able to stick around in the league, because I don't think he offers much outside of shooting right now, at least.
Yeah, defensively is the biggest concerns with me for him too, because he has the frame and has the look of a guy who should be able to defend at a fairly high level, good physicality, good size, but he just kind of doesn't. Like, he gets blown by relatively often. He seems to get like out of line with his hips in terms of giving guys lane to the basket too often. And he's just like, he's a very efficient player, but you rarely see him go like above and beyond. Like, he'll hit his catch and shoot looks. He was terrific, his catch and shoot numbers and all that. But as far as like actually creating for himself and driving to the basket, getting to his spots, there wasn't a lot of that I saw. So I'm also probably a little bit lower than him for most, but I think there will be a role for him as well. Do you have any other names outside of that you're high on that other guys might not be as much?
Well, I'll give you 2. One, in terms of my instant impact phrase that I've used throughout the show a lot, is EJ Liddell. I think he's going to be able to come in and play in the NBA right away. Reminds me a lot of like Eric Pascal out of Villanova a few years ago. Herb Jones, as I was talking about earlier, from Alabama, where defensive player of the year in the SEC, player of the year in the SEC, and he somehow fell to the second round. I think Liddell kind of fits into that type of thing where he's one of the better players in the Big Ten. He's getting overlooked because of that like tweener size, but he's going to be able to come in and make an impact. And then a guy that I'm willing to take a swing on if I'm one of those teams like right in the middle of the first round is Bryce McGowan's out of Nebraska. Had an up and down season at Nebraska. They were supposed to be a potential tournament team. Their season really bottomed out, but they got better as the year went on, which I kind of liked. Down the stretch, they were finding a way to win some games, and that shows that kind of he could have just easily mailed it in, just packed it up, but he was finding ways to get better. You saw some really exciting plays out of him. He's a guy who plays above the rim, and he showed some potential to shoot the ball from outside. a pretty good free throw shooter, not a great 3-point shooter, but the free throw is the indicator where he's got the potential there. But he's a guy who I kind of like that potential, and I'm intrigued to see where he fits. I hope he goes to a team that gives him a good chance to develop.
Yeah, both really good names there. McGowan's this guy who the shooting splits look ugly, but he has a feel of like a much better player. And he's like he shot under 30% from three, under 40% from the field, but it felt like he scored so much more than that. I agree. In the long term, projects very well. Ousmane Dieng's another guy kind of in the early lottery that I really like. I think will outperform his draft slot. And then looking beyond that, I think there's a lot of like late round talent and even early second round talent that doesn't get acknowledged this year. EJ Liddell's a great name. Marshawn Beauchamp's a guy I really like. Christian Braun, Jalen Williams. There's a ton of just like guys that I think can fit a role and I'm excited about. Dalen Terry's another guy I want to shout out. Kind of a forgotten guy at Arizona because obviously overshadowed by Benedict Mathurin and Christian Koloko, who are both expected to go off the board before him. But he's a guy that I think some team is going to luck into and be very happy with in terms of he brings it every single night. He competes. He's a clap in your face, slap the hardwood defender, and he makes an impact. So we're going to get back to you guys and talk a lot more, some more draft content coming. Ryan, give a shout out where everybody can find you at.
You can follow me on Twitter at Ryan Coyle 35, and then on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at Beef Up Front as well.
Perfect. So appreciate you guys for tuning in. More draft content is on the way for sure, and we will talk to you next time.